Hey everyone, and welcome to the 5 Bytes Podcast. I'm your host, Rory Monahan. And of course, as always, the podcast is brought to you by my sponsors, and that includes Numescent, the inventors of the first and only cloud-native container management platform for Windows desktops, and also brought to you by Master Packager, an application packaging software that helps you build packages that end users love, enterprises want, and the Windows OS needs. If you enjoy the show each week, you have these awesome sponsors to thank. And now for some news. Microsoft has confirmed that some Windows 10 and Windows 10 Enterprise LTSC 2021 devices will boot into Bitlocker recovery after installing the recent May 2025 security updates, specifically KB 5058379. They suggested it is affecting only a small number of devices. According to bleepcomputer.com, reports point to a wide variety of system configurations and devices, from Lenovo, Dell, HP, and others being affected, so it's unclear if this is caused by a specific hardware or software issue. Rather more worrying, despite what Microsoft said about it being a small number and it only affecting the Bitlocker recovery, a Reddit user stated, quote, "We have about a half dozen laptops that experienced various intermittent issues after receiving the same KB. Some require Bitlocker keys to start up, others refusing to start at all." End quote. So hopefully it's just that Bitlocker prompt, because that's something that I think most organizations who have Bitlocker encryption enabled have faced in the past and probably know how to deal with. Hopefully it's not blocking a lot of PCs from starting at all. Granted, half a dozen is probably not that many in this instance, but having any not starting at all is very worrying. Less of a blocking issue, but an issue nonetheless, I saw the awesome Patch Management Mail Group had a healthy discussion and debate around a KB 5058411.msu that was in the recent updates, and that in fact that it's almost 4 gigs in size. After digging into the package, it was stated that around 3 gigs of the package is AI-related AppX bundle packages. Obviously, if you don't use those features or have a Copilot Plus PC, it seems excessive and frankly unnecessary to have such a large update. But as the structure for Windows updates is this cumulative update model that was rolled out several years ago, it seems this could be the future of updates for all. So even if you're not able to utilize what's in some of these updates, since it's cumulative, we may be seeing these ever increasingly large updates, whether or not we're getting the full effect of what's in them. So hopefully that's something that's corralled in future, or there's some sort of change, because 4 gig updates, just because there's these AI packages, could be something that is counterproductive, particularly on those smaller kiosk or thin PCs that have limited space. Microsoft's latest guidance post, published last week about VBScript removal, provides some steps for organizations to ensure that they're not still reliant on VBScript, or at least to identify areas in which they are reliant on VBScript. Microsoft wrote, quote, "At the current deprecation phase of VBScript, it's available as a feature on demand and is enabled by default in Windows 11 version 24H2. Before VBScript is disabled by default on these and future OS versions, it's critical that you identify where and how VBScript.dll is still being used within your enterprise environment." End quote. Now, I saw that NeoWin.net was suggesting that with the wording of that, it may suggest that they're planning to remove VBScript as a feature on demand earlier than expected. I'm not so sure about that, but they've provided tooling such as VBScripts for you to be able to identify, what is interacting with that VBScript DLL. So rather than being caught out, it is a good idea to be proactive and to figure out what is still dependent on that so you can remediate and move away. CISA warned U.S. federal agencies to secure their systems against ongoing attacks exploiting a high-severity vulnerability in Chrome. This particular vulnerability was CVE-2025-4664, and it was published back on May 5th. Google has since fixed the flaw for users in the stable desktop channel with patched versions 136.0.7103.113 for Windows and Linux, and 136.0.7103.114 for Mac OS. And that has been rolling out. So if you do have auto updates enabled, you should already be on that. If you're using something else for updating Google Chrome, you want to make sure that you're on at least those versions. And of course, you should be taking patches every week for Google Chrome because that's how often the security updates are released. And Chrome being a browser, it's very high as a value target for these cyber gangs. A new tool called DefendNot can disable Microsoft Defender on Windows devices by registering a fake antivirus product even when no real antivirus is installed, according to BleepComputer.com. The trick is said to utilize an undocumented Windows Security Center API that antivirus software uses to tell Windows it is installed and is now managing the real-time protection for the device. When an antivirus program is registered, Windows automatically disables Defender to avoid conflicts from running multiple security applications on the same device. For persistence, DefendNot creates an auto run through the Windows Task Scheduler, so it starts when you log into Windows every time. While DefendNot is considered a research product, the tool demonstrates how trusted system features can be manipulated to turn off security features. Microsoft Defender is currently detecting and quarantining DefendNot as Win32/sabsik.fl.ml detection. Of course, usually an exploit like this being published means that cyber gangs are going to start leveraging it pretty quickly, but at least Microsoft has moved to put this quarantining in place, so hopefully that offers some protection if this does get utilized for nefarious purposes. The Pwn to Own annual conference or event was held this week in Berlin. Security researchers were awarded $260,000 on the first day after successfully demonstrating zero-day exploits for Windows 11, Red Hat Linux, and Oracle VirtualBox. For example, Chen Lei Kui of Star Labs SG was awarded $30,000 for an exploit chain combining a use after free and integer overflow to escalate privileges to system on a Windows 11 system. Later in the event, competitors earned $435,000 on day 2 after exploiting zero-day bugs in multiple products, including SharePoint, ESXi, Oracle VirtualBox, Red Hat Linux, Enterprise, and Mozilla Firefox. The highlight was a successful attempt from Win Hong Tach of Star Labs SG once again against the VMware ESXi, which earned him $150,000 for an integer overflow exploit. And typically, we're going to see stories related to these vulnerabilities that have been discovered in the coming months, or at least that's what happened last year with some of them as they became fully disclosed, patched, and sometimes the patch subverted. So I guess watch this space. Ars Technica reported that Google is adding a new security setting to Android to provide an extra layer of resistance against attacks that infect devices, taps calls traveling through insecure carrier networks, and delivers scams through messaging services. It's called Advanced Protection Mode, which will be in the upcoming Android 16 release. Activating Advanced Protection Mode enables a host of existing and new security features that take a defense-in-depth approach to locking down phones when in high-risk environments, such as at border crossings, when targeted by repressive governments, or when connected to old carrier networks that lack modern-day anti-snooping defenses. The feature includes things like preventing the ability to connect to 2G networks, no automatic connections to insecure Wi-Fi networks, the enablement of the memory tagging extension, which is a new form of memory management that's designed to provide an extra layer of protection against use after free exploits and other memory corruption attacks, automatically locks when offline for extended periods, JavaScript protections to shut down Android's JavaScript optimizer, a feature that could be abused in certain types of exploits, and more. The protections hamper performance and capabilities of the device, though, so Google is recommending the new mode mainly for journalists, elected officials, and other groups who are most often targeted or have the most to lose when infected. The infamous Coinbase, which is very popular with those who hold cryptocurrency or exchange cryptocurrency, disclosed that a cyber gang working with rogue support agents stole customer data and demanded a $20 million ransom not to publish the stolen information. Not only did Coinbase say that they're not going to pay the ransom, they established a $20 million reward fund for any leads that could help find the attackers who coordinated the attack. According to Coinbase, the attackers obtained the customer data with the help of contractors or support staff outside the US who were paid to access internal systems. Coinbase fired the insiders after they were detected while accessing systems without authorization, but not before they exfiltrated information from those devices. While the threat actors managed to steal a combination of personally identifiable information of up to 1% of Coinbase's customer base, they couldn't steal customers' private keys or passwords and could not access Coinbase Prime accounts and hot or cold wallets. So it seems like it's at least somewhat contained. It sucks, obviously, that people's personally identifiable information was breached, and that could potentially be used for nefarious purposes, such as perhaps taking their information and trying it in brute force attacks against other services that have been breached. The data stolen apparently includes name, address, phone, email, masked social security, so the last 4 digits only, masked bank account numbers and some bank account identifiers, government ID images, which seems like a big one, account data, such as balance snapshots and transaction history, and limited corporate data, which includes documents, training material, and communications available to support agents. Coinbase said that they will reimburse customers who were tricked into sending funds to the attacker, and the company estimates that the resulting expenses will be within the range of approximately $180 million to $400 million for remediation and customer reimbursements. So it seems like it's not just a case of the information is out there. It seems like some customers were potentially tricked after their information was grabbed by these cyber gangs. Something tells me this is a story that's got legs and it's going to develop further. So I guess we'll see in the next few weeks, and I'll keep tabs on it and share with you if it does develop further. The Register has reported that Microsoft is pulling the free Microsoft 365 Business Premium licenses granted to nonprofits and replacing them with Business Basic and discounts for its other services. Microsoft said, quote, "Our goal in Tech for Social Impact is to ensure nonprofits can benefit from the industry-leading solutions that are critical to ensuring the highest level of organizational security and productivity," end quote. As such, Microsoft is removing the 10 licenses for 365 Business Premium that it previously granted to nonprofits, and the replacement is that they're transitioning to provide up to 300 licenses of 365 Business Basic and discounts of up to 75% on many 365 offers to nonprofits. So if a nonprofit wants to keep using their existing Business Premium, which includes desktop versions of Office apps and management services such as Intune, they must start paying once their subscription is up. Of course, a 75% discount is substantial, but it will still be a jump for organizations which by their nature sometimes have to watch every penny because, they're living typically just within their means. Like they can't be holding too much money in reserve. Business Basic unfortunately lacks many of the features of Business Premium. The desktop versions of the Office apps are not there, they're replaced by the web apps, and Teams is still there, but many other services such as Intune are absent, and those are all very kind of critical things. Nobody really wants to use the Office web apps now, do they? I wonder if there would be any pushback and Microsoft may change course on this. I guess we'll have to wait and see. There were reports in the US last week that the current administration may discard the tiered approach to regulations in the infamous CHIP Act in favor of a global licensing system with government-to-government agreements. This could involve direct negotiations with nations like the UAE or Saudi Arabia, rather than applying broad regional restrictions. However, the Commerce Department spokeswoman indicated that debate about the new approach is still underway and no timetable has been established for the final rule. Regardless of it being kind of in a gray area, NVIDIA stock shot up in value on the news. But not long after that announcement, NVIDIA's China-specific lower-spec Hopper H20 chip, that is a lower-spec chip that could continue to be sold in the era of the CHIP Act, now requires an export license to sell into China, which appears to be forcing NVIDIA to rethink its chip strategy for China, with them stating it's no longer possible to modify the Hopper chip any further. There are rumors that NVIDIA is now working on a downgraded version of one of the Blackwell chips to maintain its presence in China. So it seems like there's certainly no easing up on regulations in terms of chips for China, which, as we saw with DeepSeek, that's not necessarily hindering them any. They're just kind of working around those limitations. But it looks like they're going to be lifting the more broad regulations of that CHIP Act to allow some who are maybe favorable with the current administration, like Saudi Arabia and UAE, to get greater access than they currently have under the CHIP Act. Over the past few weeks, some users running VMware products unsupported have reported receiving cease and desist letters from Broadcom, informing them that their contract with VMware and thus their right to receive support services has expired. The letter that was reviewed by Ars Technica and signed by Broadcom Managing Director Michael Brown told users that they are to stop using any maintenance releases, updates, minor releases, major releases, upgrade extensions, enhancements, patches, bug fixes, or security patches, save for zero-day security patches issued since their support contract ended. The letter tells users that the implementation of any such updates past the expiration date must be immediately removed, deinstalled, which that's in quote too, deinstalled. All right then. Any such use of support past the expiration date constitutes a material breach of the agreement with VMware and an infringement of VMware's intellectual property rights, potentially resulting in claims for enhanced damages and attorney's fees. Similarly, users online have reported receiving cease and desist letters even though they haven't issued updates since losing VMware support. One user on Spiceworks community forum reported receiving such a letter even though they migrated off of VMware and to Proxmarx. So it seems like they may be just taking a shotgun approach and sending this cease and desist out willy-nilly, which is a bit ridiculous and insulting to customers, but hey, there you go. And hey, if you're hearing this and thinking, well, this is a reason why I shouldn't trust these other vendors and I should just use all Microsoft products, I'm not going to cover it extensively on this episode of the podcast because it's a recent story that just broke. But apparently, Microsoft withdrew Outlook access to an individual over the weekend, and it's getting quite a lot of negative press. So I guess the moral of the story is when we become so reliant on technology, when that technology is taken away from us, it could be a real kick in the butt. I don't think it's necessarily a case of we should become less reliant on technology, but it is certainly food for thought. Regardless of who it is, VMware, obviously a large entity in its time, Citrix, Microsoft, or whoever, when assessing solutions, you should probably also be assessing the difficulty, or even not just the difficulty, but the possibility of moving to something else in the future. Microsoft's Build conference, that is aimed mainly at developers, was held this week. At the conference, Microsoft unveiled its own command line text editor, which will be accessible by simply using edit in a command prompt. It'll allow developers to edit files directly within the command line. So obviously this is something that you could already do within Linux. So this is something that I guess further bridges that divide or gap between Linux and Windows. Makes it a much more, I guess, familiar workspace for those Linux admins. Also during the event, it was reported that web developers will be able to start leveraging on-device AI in Microsoft's Edge browser soon, using new APIs that can give their web apps access to Microsoft's Pi 4 mini model. And Microsoft says the API will be cross-platform, so it sounds like this should work on Edge with something like Mac OS, for example. Also somewhat web-related, but also very AI-related, they announced a new open web protocol called NLWeb, which they say could let any website utilize AI functionality for a fraction of the cost of what web developers are able to do right now, like making API calls directly to an AI service. This protocol was essentially make it more seamless and more cost-effective to do so. During Build, it was announced that GitHub is launching an AI coding agent that could do things like fix bugs, add features, and improve documentation. The agent is embedded directly into GitHub Copilot and will start working once a user assigns it a task, according to the announcement. To complete its work, GitHub says the AI coding agent will automatically boot a virtual machine, clone the repository, and analyze the codebase. It also saves its changes as it works while providing a rundown of its reasoning in session logs. When it's finished, GitHub says the agent will tag you for review. Developers can then leave comments that the agent will automatically address. That part sounds pretty nice. And this also sounds somewhat similar to OpenAI's Codex that they just announced, their agentic software engineer agent. So interesting to see such a quick Microsoft equivalent to an OpenAI offering. Also announced during Build was a native Model Context Protocol in Windows and the launch of the Windows AI Foundry. The Model Context Protocol is something that was actually introduced by Anthropic last year, and it's an open source standard that's often referred to as the USB-C port of AI apps, according to the register. Okay. I've never heard of it as a USB-C for AI apps, but hey, this is such a new space, I don't know if it's often referred to at all. Anyway, just as USB-C connects devices from many manufacturers to a variety of peripherals, developers can use MCP to quickly let their AI apps or agents talk to other apps. Web services are now even parts of Windows itself. Microsoft's embrace of this protocol is a big part of its ambitions to reshape Windows and make it ready for a world of AI agents and to be able to connect to apps and services in ways that haven't been possible before. Microsoft is supporting MCP in a big way inside Windows, alongside even broader efforts to power what it calls the agentic web. In order to evolve Windows to this agentic world that Microsoft envisions, the company is introducing some new developer capabilities to enable the MCP framework for its AI agents to expose key Windows functionality that AI agents would be able to access. The register suggests seeing it in action reminded them of Vista's UAC prompts that would pop up whenever you needed admin permissions to do things. Only I guess it's going to be more, oh, well, this is something AI can help with. Prompt. Hopefully it's not as annoying as the first iteration of UAC was. That thing was way too noisy. And on the Windows AI Foundry, which is basically the foundation for this future envisioned by Microsoft, where AI is the first-class citizen within Windows, it seems the agentic AI is kind of the main focus area of the Windows AI Foundry, at least from what I'm reading in the Book of News. They also announced that the Azure AI Foundry is going to be expanded to include models from xAI, which is Twitter's weird integrated AI, and that includes Grok 3 and Grok 3 Mini. Also during Build, Microsoft announced that it's making its Windows subsystem for Linux open source, opening up the code for community members to contribute to. So that's probably wise and in keeping with the whole philosophy of those who prefer Linux, so probably a wise move. They also announced two important changes to Windows security posture, which they say will help keep users in control of their security and privacy. First is administrator protection, which I feel like I've already talked a little bit about on this podcast. But they say this is a new platform security feature that will prevent unintended elevation by ensuring that users validate with Windows Hello before allowing actions that require admin privileges. Access to sensitive resources such as camera, microphone, and location will soon require explicit user content. And also interesting here is they're saying that desktop app developers are encouraged to update their apps to include package identity. So if you're packaging your applications currently into MSIX or AppX, which you should be because that's kind of the expected standard going forward, and you're not identifying what's required, such as camera, for example, then this could become problematic when the administrator protection is on by default. It's not on by default just yet. Both features are now in preview and may impact applications that rely on previous platform behavior, so there is a word of warning there. They also announced support for updating Win32 apps directly in Microsoft Store during the event, even if the updates are provided by their publishers. Previously, once an MSI or EXE app was installed, users could not get the newer version via the store. Now, when a new version is available, users will be able to update to the latest version from downloads or the product's detail page. Thought that was a little bit interesting because Microsoft has an add-in in the Intune suite for the enterprise app catalog that does something similar, where you essentially install a certain base version of the application, and then certain applications are able to then grab the updates automatically from the vendor. But this sounds like it's kind of using the Microsoft Store still as the conduit or the management for getting those updates. I also personally just find this interesting because obviously I come from a very application management, deployment, packaging background. And I thought the path to travel was going to be kind of strictly towards MSIX, and seemingly with the administrator protection, it's going to possibly force more developers to use that going forward as the standard to fall in line with the administrator protection, because they'll have to use those identity tags. But at the same time, they're still trying to encourage more and more developers to leverage the Microsoft Store and get more quality applications into there. So they kind of lamented and opened up the store to regular MSI and setup.exe applications. So to me, it just kind of seems like speaking out of both sides of the mouth, right? It's like, hey, use this going forward. This is the standard. But hey, also bring your applications using these data package technologies over to the Microsoft Store because we really want apps there. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Perhaps that guillotine is still falling, but falling slower for those who are relying on things like MSI. There was a whole host of other announcements. I can't get to absolutely everything because it's a huge book of news. But as you might expect, the focal point for the Microsoft Build announcements has mostly been around AI, and I'd say that's going to be the case for some time. And I'm sure when Microsoft Ignite rolls around, it's going to be the same, just maybe less developer focused, more on the consumer and enterprise side. But I'll share a link to the book of news if you'd like to read it for yourself, and you'll find that with this episode of the podcast over at 5bytespodcast.com. And this episode is, of course, episode 387. Microsoft recently signed a deal with sustainable forest management firm EFM to purchase 3 million carbon removal credits in its attempt to become carbon neutral by 2030, according to WindowsCentral.com. The deal includes an offtake agreement for the delivery of up to 700,000 credits over the next decade from a 68,000-acre property in Washington state's Olympic Peninsula. The sustainable forest management firm would transition the plot to climate-smart forest management under its FSC certified model. Microsoft's Climate Innovation Fund has already made its first reforestation investment in the U.S. by backing EFM Fund 4. As a result, the investment has secured an additional 2.3 million high-quality credits for Microsoft to leverage in the future. So, on the face of it, it seems like it's a pretty good move. It seems like, Microsoft is aware that they're going to be using up a hell of a lot of resources, but they're investing in replanting and reforesting, which hopefully will offset at least some of it. It has been reported that OpenAI is working on a feature for ChatGPT that records your screen or microphone, not as a direct integration with apps like Teams or Zoom, but just independently. The feature will then be able to transcribe and summarize your meetings similar to Copilot in Teams, but obviously since it's not being baked into Teams, it could work for various services. So interesting, once again, obviously Microsoft is deeply working with OpenAI, but OpenAI is also continuing to forge its own path forward that's independent of Microsoft. In other OpenAI news, OpenAI has launched a preview of a software engineer agent called Codex. Codex reportedly can perform tasks for you such as writing features, answering questions about your codebase, fixing bugs, and proposing pull requests for review. Each task runs in its own cloud sandbox environment, preloaded with your repository. When widely available, users will be able to access Codex through the sidebar in the chatbot and assign it tasks by typing a simple prompt and clicking Code. If you want to ask Codex a question about your codebase, you click Ask, and each task is processed independently in a separate isolated environment preloaded with your codebase. Codex is capable of reading and editing files and can run commands such as test harnesses, linters, and type checkers. OpenAI added that task completion typically takes between 1 and 30 minutes depending on the complexity of said task. So I guess another example of maybe where things are going with AI, with this agentic AI, and this one specifically Codex, which is a software engineer agent by OpenAI. And finally, OpenAI announced that ChatGPT users now have access to GPT 4.1, which is the version that I mentioned previously on the podcast, I think about 3 weeks ago, that was launched for access via the API only, but now it is available to just general ChatGPT users via the web. The update brings what OpenAI describes as improved coding and web development capabilities to paid ChatGPT subscribers, with wider enterprise rollout planned in the coming weeks. And now this episode's scripts, tricks, and tips. Going to keep it light this week because it's another one of those constrained weeks where I've got to travel and the episode's coming out a bit early. But as I mentioned on the podcast, and I've even covered on scripts, tricks, and tips before, but it's worth repeating, you should check out the Patch Management Mail Group. It's a Google Mail group because there's great discussion there, and it's by far the best way to keep up to date on Windows updates and different security updates for enterprise products. But not only that, I don't know if I've mentioned this before, the sysadmin subreddit on Reddit typically does a Patch Tuesday mega thread, and that's also really, really beneficial. It tends to get even greater engagement than the Patch Management Mail Group. It's one of the first places I go when reviewing for this podcast. Now, I don't typically just report everything I see in there. I'll wait for it to be kind of corroborated by multiple sources. But it's also just good to maybe, as an admin, keep abreast of what potentially could be a problem. So I'll share a link to that with this episode for the May updates. But if you join the subreddit, you'll be able to find the future months' updates and mega threads too. Well, that's it for this episode of the podcast. If you're going to be in the event at EUC Tech Denmark in Billund, swing by the new Messent booth and say hello. I will be there. And if not, I'll catch you next week.